Well, from the pristine and sunny shores of the North Saskatchewan River right here in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, all the way over to TO for my next guest, author and friend of mine, Robert Lawson. How are you doing, my friend? This is Do You Know Jack?
It's good to talk to you.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And I mean, you've got you've got a couple of books out. Razamasnaz, of course, the Nazareth book came out in 2016. It's, had a chance to simmer a little bit. What I guess taking it all the way back. I mean, Razamasnaz, right? That's your first book, am I right? Like, how'd you get into writing?
Razamasnaz is my first book. That's true. I've been running my own website of like music reviews and cult movie reviews and stuff like that for quite a while, and I enjoyed it. And I also used to send out kind of email newsletters to friends and family of album reviews and notes, and I'd harass them with that kind of stuff. But it really happened when a very good friend of mine, Martin Popoff, who's written many, many books about rock and heavy metal. He called me up one day because I had a piece on my website about Kiss's Destroyer album.
Right.
And Martin called me up and said, there's stuff in there that I didn't know about Destroyer. Are there other bands that you know this much about? And I said, sure. So he said, okay, you got to start writing books.
Right.
And he said, well, think of a band, like Martin's my mentor, really, he is. And he said, think of a band that you know as much about Destroyer, about all of their albums.
Uh-huh.
And that got me thinking, and I just started looking at my collection and seeing what I had and what I was really passionate about. And I was going to write a Cheap Trick book first.
Yeah.
And then I realized that there's a guy in the UK named Mike Hayes, and he'd written a Cheap Trick book, and I have it, and a lot of people have it and enjoy it. And I thought, wow, there's no way I could do that.
Yeah,
because
of course.
his book is so good. So my second choice was Nazareth, and I did it, and it came out quite well. A lot of people enjoyed it, and after that, then I kind of backtracked on my original position when I realized that the way that the template for my Nazareth book is very different than what Mike did for the Cheap Trick book.
Uh-huh.
And I thought, no, I can do a Cheap Trick book because it's going to be different enough. And plus, his at that point had been out of print for many, many years, and it only goes up to the mid or late 90s or something.
Yeah.
So I thought it can coexist. Like, one of my attractions of doing the Nazareth book was that I discovered that there are no books about Nazareth. And I thought, wow, for a band who, at the time had been around for like 47 years or something, and there was no books about them, I thought, well, I guess I got to step up to the plate. And then with the Cheap Trick one, I just thought, their career is so varied and so interesting that they can stand to have more than one book on a Cheap Trick bookshelf.
So I guess, like, Cheap Trick aside, Robert, I mean, what was it about Nazareth that caught your attention early on as a young fan?
Nazareth were just a group like Cheap Trick and Kiss and Blue Oyster Cult and a lot of different groups like that really caught my imagination. And there was just always something about Nazareth that I loved. It's like, I always loved early AC/DC as well. And to me, Nazareth they were kind of like AC/DC, but then, like, Dan had just such an incredible voice, and Manny's guitar playing was just phenomenal.
Yeah.
They were just a band that I just kind of always followed, and when they put out a new album, I always picked it up. And there was times that I would listen to them more than others. I probably didn't follow them too much in the late '80s, but they put out an album called Boogaloo at one point, and I thought it was great. And I saw them on that tour. So they've just always been on my radar, but it was really just a matter of, instead of just posting information or writing articles for my website, following Martin's instructions to get it all together into a book, into like a hard copy.
Uh-huh.
And it was just, realizing that, well, I think I know enough about Nazareth to get a start on it, and then I'll just devote, the next 2 years or whatever
Sure.
to finding out everything that I don't know.
Well, I guess that's what I'm also curious about, in terms of both your books really is, how you go about researching. I mean, I guess since we're talking about Nazareth, you might as well start there.
Well, a lot of it is time management. Because all this information is out there. And, that's what a lot of people ask me often is just like, where do you find the time? Like with the Nazareth book, I literally listened to nothing but Nazareth for probably at least a year and a half, except for on Sundays.
Yeah.
When me and my girlfriend at the time would listen to jazz records. But the rest of the time, it doesn't matter. If I'm in the mood, to listen to anything else, it doesn't matter, because today's the day that or this is the week that I'm studying the Snaz album, and I need as much time doing that as possible. The other benefit that I've had with both the books is to really tap into some hardcore fans.
Yeah.
Who are out there, who are real experts, who are fanatical about the band. And I would just introduce myself to them and say, hey, this is a project that I'm working on.
Yeah.
And, do you have any interest in being a part of it? And a lot of the guys and women just really step up and say, there's this one part of their career that no one ever seems to get right. And if you're writing a book, I want to make sure that this gets handled correctly. I'll say, yeah, let's talk about it. So I have a really good kind of a research team who helps me with stuff. There's always a couple of guys out there who have like every Nazareth bootleg or every Cheap Trick bootleg, or guys who have lists of every show they ever played. And, like I'm into like a lot of different bands, and I listen to a lot of different music. But, if you tap into some of those guys out there who that's like all they do, or practically all they do, and you say, hey, come along for the ride, man, and let's try to make this book the best that it can be. And a lot of these guys, they care about the band so much that their thoughts are, if somebody's writing a book about my favorite band, I've got to be involved, because I want to help, to just kind of steer it in the right direction. And I welcome that kind of input from the fans, and it's so you get a bit more of a collaborative effort.
Now, in terms of the actual band members themselves, I mean, did you get a lot of time to chat with those guys? I just from what I understand, I think Pete is the last and sole remaining original member, and I guess what they're calling Nazareth. But I mean, did you get a chance to talk to Pete or any of the other guys?
I purposely stayed away from that for the most part, just because I am such a fan and I admire them so much. I didn't want them to kind of influence the direction of the book. So for example, if there's a certain song or an album that maybe I was going to, say that it's not their greatest effort, I might kind of back down from doing that, I thought, if I get too close to them. But I did ask the three guys that I did contact, and they were all pretty helpful, were the first three guitar players, I guess. So Manny Charlton, I asked him a few questions. Billy Rankin, I asked him a few, and Zal Clemenson. And I'm huge fans of all three of those guys. So I would ask them just a few questions here or there, but mostly I was trying to tap into the fans and the real big collectors. Now, since the book has come out, I have spent time with Pete, and we've talked about the book, and I spent some real quality time last fall in Scotland with Dan, which was wonderful.
So, I mean, did you show both those guys the book, and, how did they react?
Well, actually, shortly after the Nazareth book came out, I was at work, and I think somebody sent me a message through Facebook or something, and they said, go to the Nazareth, a certain fan page or something, or maybe it was even an official page. Go to that page right now. And I went to it, and there was a picture of Dan holding a copy of my book. Oh, wow. And I didn't send it to him. At that point, I had no contact with him. So seeing this photo of him, apparently it's him in his back garden holding the book, just blew my mind. It was absolutely incredible. And then when I saw Nazareth, they were in town in 2017, and at the end of the show, I was with the band, and Pete said to me, Dan says that this is a good read. and that blew my mind as well. So it was, and the other guys in the band are happy. I gave them all copies of the book, and they're all happy to get it, and all good.
That's awesome. I mean, you mentioned how you met Dan in Scotland, Dan McCafferty, of course. Did you get any content from Dan when you were there, just for your own purpose, like whether it be podcast or blog related, or was it just sort of a social call and visit, more or less?
It was a social call for sure. We spent 2 hours actually, or maybe a little bit more than 2 hours together over drinks at his local. And he had some questions for me about the book, and I had a few things. There were a few things that I could never really sort out for the book, like a few questions that everyone I would ask just had no idea. And so I was able to ask him a couple of those kind of things, but mostly it was just spending time with him, and it was a real neat thing, because I had met the whole band before, like years ago, in 1998 after a concert, but that's a very different context.
Yeah, of course.
Because there are these huge musical heroes of mine, and I'm this like whimpering fan, just like begging for an autograph. Yeah. Whereas when being with Dan in Scotland was much more different. It was we're literally sitting in a booth in a bar together,
of course,
over drinks, and talking about Nazareth, talking about his career, talking about he wanted to know why I wrote the book.
Huh.
So it was a great conversation, and I'll tell you that it's a real wonderful experience to leave to use the restroom, and when I come back and Dan is actively engaged speaking to my wife.
Yeah.
She's a pretty quiet person, and I would say, it's okay, I'll be back right away. She doesn't really know who Dan is. and I'd come back, and it's like he's got a hand on her arm, and he's like really asking her a lot of questions about what made you guys come to Scotland, and how long are you here, and what do you plan on doing, and what do you plan on seeing.
Yeah.
A really, really warm experience.
That's amazing. So, I mean, I guess through all of this, just thinking about your Nazareth fandom, I mean, what's your go-to jam when it comes to the band itself? What's your favorite Nazareth track, or your favorite 2 or 3 Nazareth tracks?
They have so many. I mean, their peak period, which I guess if we count from maybe 73 to 79, Playing the Game as an album maybe isn't quite as strong as some of the others, but I mean, they've got 6 or 7 albums in a row that they're all at least 8 out of 10s, if not 10 out of 10s in my book.
Yeah.
So you really can't go wrong with any of them.
Yeah.
All that mid 70s stuff, whether it's Hair of the Dog or there's just no end of them. I like some of the stuff that's a little poppier too, like Holiday. But even a tune like This Flight Tonight, like that is a really old song at this point. And when it comes on, it's still that momentum to it. It's just dynamite. None of that stuff has lost any of its power, in my opinion. It's all great, great stuff. And I think if you're only going to have 6 or 7 Nazareth albums, like you have to have Razamasnaz, Loud and Proud, Hair of the Dog. I love Close Enough for Rock and Roll. Even though for some reason they only ever played the title song from that, or Telegram. It's the only song from that they ever played live. No Mean City is incredible. I think Snaz is one of the great live albums of all time.
Yeah.
You really can't go wrong. And then kind of the later records with Billy Rankin running the show, like No Jive and Move Me. Terrific albums, great hard rock albums. I don't know exactly why they didn't kind of connect with the public as much as the 70s stuff, but wonderful stuff.
Yeah. One thing I think is amazing about Nazareth is how they can take a a cover song and you wouldn't even know that it's by somebody else. They really make it their own. I mean, just thinking about Love Hurts, for instance, or, one of my favorite tracks off of the Razamasnaz record is actually Vigilante Man, which is a Woody Guthrie tune.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the really, really cool things about Nazareth.
Well, that's how they kind of earned their chops, because when they started as the Shadettes, and even when they became Nazareth, they were like a top 40 cover band, because that's how you had to survive if you were a working musician. So
yeah.
there was like a ballroom circuit, and they would, play in Aberdeen and Inverness and Edinburgh and Glasgow and all these different, and smaller towns too. And you had to play Zeppelin and Deep Purple and, all this kind of stuff. And that's where they really tightened up. So when you get to the point of This Flight Tonight, if you compare it to the original, very, very different. They're not only adding guitars, they're changing the arrangement. They're doing some different things, like there's a vocal effect on it. Fantastic stuff. They definitely make a cover their own. I agree with you on that.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. Well, I mean, let's just pivot over to, the Cheap Trick book. Of course, it's called Still Competition, The Listener's Guide to Cheap Trick. I mean, I guess similar to Razamasnaz, I mean, just in terms of my questions, I mean, what was your approach in terms of this book? Was it the same, like deliberately avoiding contact with the band members and sort of going to the fans for input and so on and so forth?
Yeah, pretty much. Cheap Trick are a lot more insular than Nazareth, so I think even if I wanted to ask them questions, it'd probably be pretty tough to get to them.
Yeah.
They're kind of more like AC/DC, in which they're a self-sufficient unit,
mm-hmm.
and they don't talk to people too much. But similar idea. It definitely follows the same template as the Nazareth book, which is a chapter by chapter look at each album. I talk about singles and chart action. If there's music videos, TV appearances, radio broadcasts, a little bit of talk about bootlegs. I get a couple of fans in there to tell stories about some shows that they've seen that were really incredible or noteworthy for some reason. But the Cheap Trick book, Cheap Trick was the first band I ever saw. The first concert I ever saw was Kiss on the Love Gun tour, and the opening act, who I'd never heard of them before, but it was Cheap Trick.
Yeah.
So I go back pretty far with them, and there's another one that I thought, wow, I've got all this stuff. I really, now that I know the template, now that I kind of have my format established with the Nazareth book, I think a Cheap Trick book would be a lot of fun. And it was great. It was really fun doing that research.
Yeah. Well, and what I really love about this conversation we're having right now is I would also consider Martin Popoff a mentor of mine, just because he's such a great interviewer, and just the level that he's attained and the sheer volume of artists that he's managed to talk to over the years. I mean, what advice did Martin give you when it came to approaching both these books?
Well, I guess the one basic thing that he told me way in the beginning, when I kind of centered down that I was going to do Nazareth, I said I called him up, or I talked to him somehow, and I said, I've decided I'm going to do a Nazareth book, and I had to make sure that he hadn't done one already.
Yeah.
Luckily for me, he hadn't. But the one thing he told me was write every day. Every day, write something down. If you look at it like the next day and you don't like it, that's okay. But you have to do something every day, because if you take too much of a break, the tone can change.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not, so you need to do something every day. And I have pretty much followed that. There's not many days where I don't do anything towards a book.
Uh-huh.
My usual day is, like I commute, I take a subway to work in the morning, so I'm listening to music and writing notes on my way to work. And before I open the shop, I type it all up. And on the way home, I'm listening to music and making notes. Then I type all that up. And after my wife goes to bed, then I'm either throwing on a bootleg DVD, or I'm listening to tunes on YouTube, or I'm just doing something else, and I'm just jotting down those notes. And then the next day I type that up, and I just keep, I'm a pretty organized person, and you have to be organized to do this, to say, like I referred to earlier, if I go, well, it's Friday night, and I've got these, 3 songs that I haven't really paid attention to. This is all I'm doing for the rest of the night until I have this hammered down, and it might be something as silly as comparing an album edit to a single edit, or a different edit that was on a 7-inch in, Uruguay or something. So I just line up these 3 tracks, and I'll have the lyrics printed in front of me, and I'm making notes on where the edits are. And, okay, they dropped this verse, and they moved this chorus forward.
Right.
This is what we're doing tonight. And then tomorrow I'm typing it up. So you just go forward that way, and then it's on to the next album.
Yeah.
And once that's done, it's on to the next one. And then when I get all the way to the end, I start over at the beginning, and I listen to that first album again, fresh, without my notes in front of me. And then anything that pops out, I'll just jot it down and then compare it and say, oh, did I notice that the first time around?
Mm-hmm.
And, and before you know it, if you do that, and if the artist or band has 25 to 30 albums, if you give that much attention to each one, at the end of it, you've got a book.
So just thinking now, you've done Nazareth, you've done Cheap Trick. I mean, what would be on your bucket list for a potential third book?
It's almost done.
Oh, wow.
As soon as I get off the phone with you, I got to get to work.
I'm literally in the way of Robert Lawson progress. So, I mean, is it too soon then for you to divulge what you're working on?
No. Well, at this point, some people know. When I first started, so what happens when you finish for me anyway, when I finish a book, I send it off to the publisher. And then they kind of look at it for like 3 to 4 months, maybe even, or 2 to 4 months, say.
Right.
And, they just check it over, and they want to make sure, how many pages. And while they're doing all that stuff, I got nothing to do. Because my part's done.
Yeah.
I can't do any more. Like, it's in their hands.
Yeah.
So what I've done both these times is once I give it to them, and I have nothing to do, I start my next book. So
wow.
Before the Nazareth book came out, I was already like 3 to 4 chapters into the Cheap Trick book.
Wow. So what do you...
And similarly, so when I submitted the Cheap Trick book, and I think they were even with that one a little longer, like as soon as I send that, like the next day, I'm already starting on the next thing. My wife thinks I work too hard.
So what are you 3 or 4 chapters into now, Robert?
This one's actually almost done, and I figured after doing a book about Scotland's greatest band, and after doing a book about one of America's greatest bands, I had to do a book about my home country's greatest all-time band, which is the Guess Who.
Wow. Well, that's something. I mean, that's exciting. I don't honestly. I don't. Sometimes I wonder how much people really know the level of talent that band has. I mean, Burton is just insane with his keyboard skills and his vocals, obviously, and then of course, Randy Bachman is. If you sort of shove Alex Lifeson to the side, you've got Randy right there. I mean, I think you could, strongly debate either of them for being Canada's greatest guitar player, really.
I think that, now with all the classic rock stations and things like that, and bands that go out and just sort of do greatest hits tours, which I'm not a fan of, it's kind of taken for granted how great the Guess Who were. They had some big hits, some huge hits actually. Some of the first number 1 international songs out of this country.
Right.
But if you actually dig into their albums, like what I said about Nazareth, the Guess Who batting average is really high. From Canned Wheat to We Feel Soul, American Woman, Share the Land. These are all wonderful albums. Artificial Paradise, So Long Bannatyne, number 10. They're all essential records. Like, their career is so much more than just a greatest hits CD. And there's not that many of the albums, so it's not like you have to, go get every, like, Bob Dylan record. even though I do own every Bob Dylan record. I just point that out. But with like, if you wanted the best albums of the Guess Who, we're still only talking about like 8 or 9 albums, so it's not that much of an investment. Like, you could do that. And the same way, like I said with Nazareth, like if you just got their 7 or 8 best, like you could do that. It's not so overwhelming. You know, say a guy like Frank Zappa who has like over 120 albums out or something.
Yeah.
The Guess Who, it's very manageable. You know, you just get all their albums from We Feel Soul up to Power in the Music.
Yeah.
And you're good.
Well, that sounds like there's an amazing, book in the works, and of course you've got Razamasnaz and Still Competition out already. Where's the best place that we can pick up a copy of the 2 books that you already have out? Because from what I've seen of either, they are must-have copies for any fan of rock and roll music, really, and especially classic rock.
Well, if you live in Canada and you want a signed copy from me, you can definitely order one directly, and you can get a hold of me either through my website, which is thissideofthetracks.ca, or you can find me on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter, and I'm actually on Instagram now. If you don't live in Canada, then the shipping makes it kind of prohibitive. Some people have still contacted me, and they've wanted a copy, even though they live in the States or even in the UK. And I'll do that. It's just that, the shipping's a little high, but
sure.
I try to sign, something extra special in there, make it personal to them to kind of make up for that. But otherwise, like if you're in the States and you don't care whether I've scribbled in the front of it or not, then Amazon is your best bet. It's available on actually both my books are on all international Amazon sites. So whether you're in Germany or France or even in Japan, the Netherlands, all those countries have their own devoted Amazon sites, and both of my books are available through that.
Great. Well, listen, Robert, it's been great finally, catching up with you and getting to talk about you and your work and your passion for writing, and of course our shared mentor and Martin Popoff. Definitely thanks for your time, man. Much appreciated.
Hey, great talking, and maybe we'll do it again when the Guess Who book comes out.
Definitely. I would count on it.
Sounds good.
All right, man. Have a good night.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now.